I'm Brittany, this is Shen Wei, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we continue reading Volume 3 of Guardian. We are on page 235 at Chapter 19, and we will be reading through to around page 300. We are stopping at Chapter 23. So we are reading chapters 19 through 22 today. We typically read for a couple of hours. Today's stream will be a little longer because we're doing our level best to make sure that we finish Guardian by Friday. And what else? Please, no spoilers in the chat because there's always at least a few people who are reading along for the first time like I am, though I have seen the show. We are going to be taking 2 breaks today since we're going a little bit longer, about every 45 minutes. So that I can get some more tea, walk around, take care of my throat if I need to do anything at that particular moment in time. Because I'm also doing my level best to not get the cough plague that I have gotten every year for the past, 5 years. And so far, I'm winning. And if I have to be a little bit paranoid in order to win, I will do that. So, break every around 45 minutes. Lot of stuff told to us yesterday, and we seem to be in the middle of a case now at the 11th hour. I'm deeply curious. So get that over here. During the entire confrontation, Ghostface hadn't so much as glanced at Lin Jing, probably assuming he and his trivial abilities were beneath notice. Overwhelmed with shock and fear, Lin Jing muttered reassurances to himself. "It'll be okay, Amitabha. Everything will definitely be okay." Lin Jing craned his neck, trying to get a look at Shen Wei, who was somewhat obscured by the Wangchuan waters. He found himself wishing that he could turn into a large turtle, able to swim and hide at will. After another furtive look at their surroundings, he called out in the tiniest voice he could manage, "Shenlosha? Shenlosha?" There was no response. Out of nowhere, a Yochu appeared, baring its crooked teeth at Lin Jing. Startled, Lin Jing instinctively leaned away and clamped his mouth shut to hide his own tidy pearly whites, afraid that the Yochu might see them and become jealous. The Yochu, which Ghostface had presumably sent to keep an eye on him, licked its lips but ultimately didn't dare take a bite of the things it was meant to guard. Instead, it circled Lin Jing a few times, eyes trained on him like a hunter with prey locked in its sights. Lin Jing took a deep breath and stared right back at it, trembling. "Hey," he said, "do you speak human?" High-level Yochu were intelligent and capable of conversing with humans. This one gave its cunning prey a wary look. "Shut up," it responded in the peculiar hoarse voice of its kind. Being able to communicate was a good start. Lin Jing sat on the ground and deliberately let out a sigh. "Now that the others have all run away, it's just the 2 of us here. If I shut up, won't you be lonely?" "Ah, don't do that. Be civilized, please." The Yochu had come closer, its menacing shark-like teeth on full display. "I'll shut up," Lin Jing cried. I'll shut up right now. Please believe me. Monks don't lie." The Yochu withdrew its claws and teeth and slowly backed off to one side. There was nothing Lin Jing could do. He gave the unconscious Shen Wei another anxious look, but his only real option was to force himself to calm down and silently chant the great compassion mantra. The Yochu, seeing that Lin Jing's eyes were now closed, assumed that he was finally settling down and dismissed him from its mind. It risked a glance up at Shen Wei, impaled on the ancient tree. The Yochu whimpered and retreated a tiny bit further. Peace was finally restored to this place, thousands of chi below the Huangquan. But then the Yochu sensed something. Its head snapped up with a start. Lin Jing was exactly where he'd been before, still sitting with his eyes closed like he'd become a statue of a Buddha. Behind him, the great ceiling rock was wreathed in a warm white glow, as though responding to something. The Yochu shot to its feet and tried to reach over the rock to grab Lin Jing's shoulder, but as its claws neared the white light, they crumbled to ash, as if they'd touched a blazing hot flame. Lin Jing, the fake monk, was quick on the uptake. Seeing the howling, screaming Yochu told him that this was an effective approach, so he inhaled deeply and began loudly reciting scriptures. The white light on the ceiling rock glowed hotter and hotter, and the guard dog of a Yochu jumped up and down, but it had no way of getting any closer. The halo of white light kept spreading, expansive enough now that it brushed against Shen Wei. An uneasy furrow creased Shen Wei's brow, the only sign that he was more than a hanging corpse. The Yochu's spiraling anxiety finally drove it to risk everything. It flung itself forward with a howl, willing to be reduced to coal if that meant it could rip the damned scripture-reciting monk apart. A crackling filled the air as its flesh and skin roasted, but the Yochu held fast in spirit even as its body was reduced to ruin. Its mouth, burned down to nothing but teeth, gaped open. It lunged for Lin Jing's neck. That was enough to finally disrupt Lin Jing's chanting. He closed his eyes and yelped, "Buddha! This disciple is close to surrendering his mortal body and ascending to the higher realm. Where did Dashixiang go? Save me, Shen Lao, boss! Dashixiang!" He kept up this random yelling until long past when he'd expected those knife-like teeth to sink into his neck. Eventually, he cracked his eyes open, only to find that the Yochu had hurriedly fled, as if it had been scared off. Something prompted Lin Jing to look up. Eyes like icy pools met his. At some point in the commotion, Shen Wei had woken. "Shen Lao," Lin Jing tried to call out. There was a minute flicker in Shen Wei's gaze. Are you okay?" Shen Wei struggled feebly against his bonds, making the chains around his limbs clink together. Even that tiny movement made the veins on his forehead stand out. Eventually, with great difficulty, he managed a quiet, "Why are you here? How did that person, the one who looks like you, how did he get a hold of you?" Lin Jing asked. Shen Wei closed his eyes, tilting his head back to rest it against the ancient merit tree. It was as though he had no strength at all. "He attacked me from behind," he said mildly. "I could have dodged, but I was busy taking back the chaos. I had to take the blow so that our efforts wouldn't all go to waste. It's fine, except that he stabbed me in the heart with this icicle made from frozen water of the Huangquan, so I'm unable to move at the moment." Lin Jing wasn't yet aware of who exactly Shen Wei was, but nothing about the situation seemed fine in the slightest. "Thank you." Lin Jing gulped. "Then what should I do? Do you have any way of getting me down from this stupid rock so I can help you?" There was a long moment of silence before Shen Wei said, "That stupid rock behind you is the mark of the great Hotu seal, placed there by the sovereign Hua herself." This revelation frightened Lin Jing enough that he didn't dare lean on it again. "Don't worry," Shen Wei chuckled. "That Chaos King of the Gui has enough to deal with right now. As long as I have Kunlun's divine tendon, he won't dare do anything to me. We're safe for the moment." No, let's figure out a way to save ourselves," Lin Jing quickly said. "No magical tendon can staunch your wound. If Director Zhao ever found out I just sat back and let you bleed like this, he'd make me the main course of this year's Lunar New Year's Eve dinner." Shen Wei's gaze softened at the mention of Zhao Yunlan. After some thought, he said, "If you must try something, please continue reciting your scriptures. The Great Seal originated from Nua's merciful heart. If you're sincere, it might help you." Lin Jing considered that. Since reciting scriptures was all he could really do just then anyway, he sat properly. In a booming voice with crisp enunciation, he began chanting as though he was announcing the news. The effect was comedic enough to make Shen Wei burst into laughter. With no sound around them but the murmuring Wangchuan rivers, he slowly started to listen. The lines of his brows and eyes, ruthless and stern from all the bloodshed, slowly started to soften. The white light around the great ceiling rock gradually grew to an eye-searing brightness. Lin Jing truly was a proper disciple of the Bodhidharma line. Who else could have entered a meditative state so easily, even under these conditions? The ropes around his body slowly melted away in the pool of white light, but Lin Jing didn't even notice. Shen Wei was a bit shocked. Birds of a feather, it seemed, really did flock together. Everyone who'd gathered around Zhao Yunlan seemed to be a little like him, one way or another. For example, when fixated on something, he could focus his whole attention on it and forget everything else. That's a scene break. Also, my mic is low. I get into such an automatic habit of only putting so many things beneath the mic when I record, that for streaming, I think that it's the same case when it's not. The mic can be much closer to me. Go Cheng-chung, meanwhile, had successfully managed to keep the families of the missing people in the police station, but the expected good news from Zhao Yunlan and the others wasn't forthcoming. Close to midnight, Chu Shujia and Da Qing finally returned, both looking worse for wear. All they'd managed to bring back with them were a few IDs, phones, and keys that had been scattered over the ground. It seemed that whatever they were facing, it only consumed living things. These lifeless belongings remained untouched. The police station was still as bright as day, and in the meeting room that had been co-opted for relatives of the missing, chaos reigned. Chu Shujia held Da Qing in one arm, pinching his brow tiredly with the other hand. He waved at Go Cheng-chung, beckoned him into a small office, and shut the door. Go Cheng-chung had a bad feeling. Looking from Chu Shujia to Da Qing, he said, "Chuga, where are Director Zhao and the others? Did you find Lin Daga? Zhu Hongjie went to find you guys. Did you see her? Is there any sign at all of the missing people?" Chu Shujia silently took a small evidence bag from his pocket and handed it over. Accepting it, Go Cheng-chung peered inside and saw only a handful of dust. He froze. "What is—" "Bone ash." The evidence bag hit the floor with a soft splat. Chu Shujia gave a succinct summary of what had happened at the resort, then told Go Cheng-chung, "Call headquarters immediately. Tell Wang Zheng to treat these people as disappearances for now. But a death is a death, and we won't be able to keep the truth under wraps for long. Tell her to think of a reasonable explanation we can give people." In utter disbelief, Go Cheng-chung asked, A reasonable explanation?" Chu Shujia seemed to be saying that he wanted Wang Zheng to think of how to cover up the truth. After a silence, the Corpse King delicately said, "Under normal circumstances, we can only do DNA testing if there are remains to test. It's not possible with cremated remains. Never mind this. There's not much we can do about it. Even if we gathered every speck of dust in the resort, it's impossible to tell the families which heap of dust was whose loved one." "Then at least we need to have a culprit." Chu Shujia laughed helplessly. "Go Cheng-chung, do you know who the sole executing emissary is?" Go Cheng-chung thought the emissary was scary, but he had no real idea about his background. He shook his head. "I'll be honest with you," Chu Shujia said. "My thousands of years of cultivation allow me to walk under the sun. All corpses and skeletons bow to my will, so those in the know flatter me with the title Corpse King. The next level up for me would be a Ba, which comes with a footnote. Ba is a drought monster, sometimes believed to be a corpse that doesn't dry out after death." "Awesome!" "The next level up for me would be a Ba, or a corpse immortal. But even if I attained that level, if it weren't for Director Zhao, I'd still never dare approach someone like the sole executing emissary. At the bare minimum, I'd keep a good 2 kilometers away from him. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Chu Shujia paused, then continued. "We're dealing with someone who can catch the sole executing emissary off guard. Even if he only managed that by being sneaky, it means his power is at least on par with the emissaries. Whoever this is, he's too powerful. This isn't something we can handle." Go Cheng-chung stared at him blankly, unable to accept what he was hearing. "What about their souls? If the victims' bodies are gone, there should still be souls, right? How could anyone born into this world just disappear like that for no reason?" Da Qing jumped from Chu Shujia's arms and sat on the desk. "The souls are still there." The other two both immediately turned toward him, but the black cat seemed distracted and didn't elaborate. After waiting a while, Chu Shujia prompted him, "Da Qing?" And then, right before their eyes, the cat's body began to elongate slowly, his glossy fur melting away. As Go Cheng-chung and Chu Shujia stared, mouths hanging open, he transformed into a young man whose hair fell all the way to his ankles. He was barefoot, clad in garments from some unknown era. Really, it looked as though he'd carelessly wrapped a length of cloth around himself, but none of that seemed important. Most shockingly, black fur had been replaced by pale skin, and while the cat had been tremendously fat, the beautiful youth before him was slim. "Da Qing?" Chu Shujia blurted. The lazy expression that crossed the young man's face was unmistakably feline. Yes," He spared Chushuja a glance. It's me, your lord. The most cat behavior you've ever seen. As he spoke, he jumped down from the table, landing without even the faintest sound. Every movement, every step radiated. I actually don't know how to... Felinity? Felinity? Felinity feels the closest, so that's what I'm going to go with, but it's funny that I've never... If I've seen that word, and I probably have, then I've never had to pronounce it out loud. That's hilarious. Awestruck by the magic that had unfolded before them, Chushuja and Go Cheng Chung both made way for him. Da Qing kept speaking. I don't know who sealed away my memories. I still can't remember much from all those years ago. But when I went up Kunlun Mountain with Zhao Yunlan, the great divine tree awoke something in me. Now I can take human form again. Even though transforming makes me hairless and thus hideous, I at least seem to be able to remember some things now. Go Cheng Chung and Chushuja, who were both hairless and apparently uglier than hideous, wore the same peculiar expression. The Netherworld officially calls the things we ran into today Yochu, but more accurately, they're Gui, Da Qing said. I'm not exactly sure where the Gui are from, but I know they're linked to the demise of Fuxia Nua. You heard Shen Wei. When the Gui came into the world, not a single blade of grass survived in the Great Wild. But as far as I know, the Gui don't have souls. So even though they drink blood and gnaw on bones, they don't eat mortal souls because there's no benefit to it for them. I think what happened here must have been too sudden. All those people died before their time. So even though their bodies disappeared, their souls are still souls of the living. Since the Netherworld couldn't reach them in time, those frightened spirits probably ran off somewhere. Then I'm going to find them, Go Cheng Chung said. Why? Da Qing asked, bewildered. Losing souls is the Netherworld's problem, even if they aren't in the mood to care about that right now. It took Go Cheng Chung a while to think of what to say. But I promised the families of the people who disappeared that I'd give them an explanation. You won't be able to, Da Qing said patiently. Besides, they won't believe you. So I need to go find the victims' souls. If a person existed, they can't just disappear for no reason. Go Cheng Chung was absolutely adamant on this point. That's not right. Chushuja scoffed. There are plenty of things that aren't right. Do you think you can fix them all? How do you even plan on finding these souls? No answer occurred to Go Cheng Chung for that. He gave it some thought, then looked down, embarrassed. But Chushuja didn't keep laughing at him. Instead, he pulled out a little bottle and threw it to him. Cow's tears. They'll help open your third eye so you can see the souls of the living. Go Cheng Chung looked up in disbelief. Go take care of official business first. Call Wang Zheng and tell her to send someone to come help after she gets the official story sorted. A bit awkwardly, Chushuja avoided Go Cheng Chung's too warm gaze. Repeating that. A bit awkwardly, Chushuja avoided Go Cheng Chung's too warm gaze. There's a mental image for you. I need to look for Lin Jing either way, so you might as well come along. If you can find the souls, we can take them with us. If you can't, then forget about it. Just don't give me any extra trouble. Too warm gaze indeed. You two go ahead. I need to find Zhao Yunlan, Da Qing said. He's on his own, and I'm worried about him. He took a few awkward steps as a human, but it didn't seem to occur to him to use the door. He leaped onto the windowsill, then had a thought. Turning back, he added, If the kid's too naive and doesn't understand, please try to be understanding, Corpse King. Be very careful. We only just got our new office. We haven't even had a chance to renovate yet. With that, he jumped out the window into the darkness, blinking out of view. And that's the end of the chapter. We're on page 245 for chapter 20. The 10 kings were seated high, high above. The hall was as blue as the sky. Its height and depth were endless. There was always a vast expanse of stars hanging overhead, and just underfoot were the 18 levels of hell, tongue pulling and hot oil and all, with 3,000 impassable waters flowing endlessly around them. Anyone entering the hall was walking on solid ground, but it was as if that ground were unmarred glass. The ghosts below were starkly visible as they were skinned, as they passed through mountains of knives, and as they were fried in hot oil. The sight made it seem that anyone in the hall could fall through the floor into hell at any moment. That's a image. Zhao Yunlan had asked the magistrate to lead the way to the real reincarnation cycle, but the moment they reached the netherworld, they were informed that the 10 kings wished to see them. The magistrate had no choice but to visit the Yanluo courts first. As soon as they set foot inside and got a look at the welcoming display, the magistrate's gaze flashed. The 18 levels of hell weren't ordinarily visible within the courts. As a rule, they were only displayed as a warning when a ghost who had committed the most heinous crimes refused to obey. Showing it to Zhao Yunlan like this was truly no way to treat a guest. The 10 Yanluo kings wore fierce expressions as they peered down from their pedestals high up on the walls. The dark lighting made them look like beasts baring vicious teeth. Zhu Hong, who had tagged along, stared down into the hell of tongue ripping. She saw a slouched man bound to a pole, and as she watched, one ghoul restrained him while another forced his mouth open, reaching in with a dry, bluish hand. Startled, Zhu Hong grabbed Zhao Yunlan's arm. "Don't go over there." Zhao Yunlan pried her fingers open. "Wait for me outside." Stone-faced, he marched forward. With every step, he felt like he was treading on the heads of the countless ghouls below. When he reached the center of the great hall, he stopped. That placed him directly above the hell of oil cauldrons. Zhu Hong couldn't shake the feeling that Zhao Yunlan would be spattered with hot oil at any moment. She tried to follow, but couldn't keep from glancing downward, just in time to see a long, soft tongue being yanked out of a man's mouth. It seemed as if the blood would surely splatter her face. Her stomach roiled. Finally, unable to bear it, she turned away. Zhao Yunlan's frosty gaze swept across the 10 Yanluo kings. Then he turned to the magistrate, cowering at his side. "Do you guys expect me to just stand here while we talk?" His voice was deep and cold. Each word pierced the distressed cries rising up from the 18 levels of hell. To the magistrate, Zhao Yunlan no longer seemed like the guardian. At this moment, he was far more like Kunlun Jun. The Qingguang king might be certain that Kunlun Jun's spirit hadn't been awakened, but seeing Zhao Yunlan like this made the magistrate tremble. He shot a look at the reapers. A pair of them darted out immediately, then came back with a chair as well as some tea. Zhao Yunlan took his seat like an important lord, crossing his legs. Then he placed a hand against the teacup that was being offered to him and glanced at the reaper's pale face, so like papier-mâché. "I'll pass on the tea. I'm afraid the food down here won't agree with my stomach. Now, you've put on your little show to intimidate me and kept up your appearances, but we're all very busy, so let's get to the point." 10 voices spoke, one from each of the 10 courts, layering into a unique harmony as they angrily denounced him. "Impudent young man." From the moment Ghostface had stolen Shen Wei away, right before his eyes, Zhao Yunlan had felt like a chunk of ice was weighing down on his heart. Not dissimilar to the literal chunk of ice currently spearing Shen Wei through the chest. He'd felt completely detached from everything anyone said or did. None of it seemed real or consequential. Only now, after having been confronted with such an extreme sight, did his mind begin to clear. Belatedly, he felt his anger float to the surface, although no trace of it showed his face. Zhao Yunlan crossed his arms in front of his chest. Ghostface had taken the soul-executing emissary. Whether Ghostface harmed the emissary or the emissary had gone to Ghostface's side, it was bad news for the netherworld. What was more, while there might not be a clear prognosis for the Great Seal, it clearly wasn't going to hold out for much longer. And yet, even under these circumstances, the 10 courts were still putting on such an unfriendly welcome. Appearances be damned. Years of experience working with the Netherworld told Zhao Yunlan that the dumbasses were obviously planning to ask something of him, but they were unwilling to swallow their pride to do so. Either that or they saw no need to take a mortal like him seriously and had chosen the route of coercion and bribery. Whatever the case, it meant he was under no obligation to be polite either. He gave a cold laugh. You all have to forgive the bad manners. My parents didn't raise me right, so this is just who I am. As one, the Reapers held their breaths. Some didn't understand the situation and thought this man was clearly there to start a fight. The 10 Yanluo courts were where every soul came to be judged for the sins committed before and after death. Every last one, even the noblest aristocrat or most commanding general, stood upright as they walked in and lay flat as they left. The Reapers had seen countless souls cry out for their parents, but had never seen arrogance to match his. He behaved as though he wouldn't inevitably face reincarnation sooner or later. There's a lot to unpack with that. You know, never mind the fact that that just directly harkens to the deal of we're gonna live one mortal life together, so he's not headed towards reincarnation as far as he's concerned. But then that also speaks to a greater thing about the freedom of no accountability. Like, it's like the freedom to do as you please. If you're no longer stuck in the reincarnation cycle, and this is it, and that's all she wrote, then who gives a shit? Huh. Enraged, the ensemble boomed again. Zhao Yunlan. At least who gives a shit in circumstances like these, mind. Enraged, the ensemble boomed again. Zhao Yunlan. Zhao Yunlan didn't back down. Sorry, but that's guardian to you, he retorted. This is not a mic I can drop, but woo! Oh, he's over it. He's so far past over it. At that moment, the ground beneath them started to shake. Small tremors that quickly became fiercer and fiercer. They sent sand and pebbles flying everywhere inside the Yanluo courts. Zhao Yunlan looked down. In the hell of oil cauldrons below his feet, boiling oil was sloshing over the sides of the vats. The ghouls that had looked so impressive were now running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to escape. In the hell of copper pillars, cracks appeared on the pillars, and in the hell of the mountain of knives, the blades were jumping up and down like shrews. A reaper came bursting through the doors to the 10 Yanluo courts. Falling to their knees, they cried, "Terrible news! The Great Seal! The Great Seal broke!" Even as they spoke, the doors to the halls were thrown wide open. Everyone peered out, only to see the water in the Wangchuan River boiling. All the ferrymen had abandoned their boats and taken uncertain refuge up on the Naihe Bridge, which shook precariously. The narrow Huangquan Road was already submerged beneath the rising water, and a massive black shadow was slowly approaching from below. But just as it was about to surface, it stopped. Lights as soft as fireflies began glowing on either side of the flooded Huangquan Road, pea-sized lights all in a row. Zhao Yunlan remembered the little oil lamps that had lined the road, the soul-guarding lamps. As the soft light and the huge shadow faced off, another reaper staggered in. "Ghost City! Ghost City's gates have cracked! It's utter chaos! The violent ghosts are going to rebel!" The 10 kings, who always presented a united front, started to panic. They sounded very much like 10 enormous ducks quacking noisily at one another. I'm going to be so honest with you. I misread this as as they sounded very much like 10 enormous cucks quacking noisily at one another. I corrected it on the fly the first time, but same thing, thank you. It does, it still works, it makes sense. You can see where I'm coming from. Zhao Yunlun grabbed the magistrate by the collar, jamming his gun under the man's chin. Take me to see the reincarnation cycle right now, or I'll shoot you in the head. Director Zhao, Zhuheng screamed, unable to believe his fearlessness. Alone, Yanluo King spoke up. Guardian, will you explain yourself? This single voice, unsupported by the other 9, was thin and weak. Explain myself? Go fuck yourself, Zhao Yunlun sneered. I've spent a long time holding myself back with you sons of bitches. Now move. Guardian, please wait. This time, all 10 voices rang out together. Behind him, Zhao Yunlun heard a huge clang. Glancing back, he realized that the portal to hell had been closed at some point. Ooh, art. Oh, you'll see why I'm excited about this art in a second. The hall that had been so dark was now brightly lit, revealing the 10 kings for all to see. Exposed by the light, they seemed surprisingly normal, despite their slightly peculiar get-ups. The mechanism on the wall began to turn. With a great noise of metal springs, a stone door opened in the wall, behind which was another door. The 10 kings descended from their towering pedestals, each taking out a key that was always on their person. They opened 10 doors, one after another, and behind them all lay a huge pond with an ephemeral air to it. It didn't seem as though they were even in the netherworld anymore. This was more reminiscent of the Jade Pond. There's a footnote for that. The Jade Pond is a mythical place in the heavens where the Queen Mother of the West resides. And there, in the pool, Zhao Yunlun saw a gigantic lamp. It was a giant version of the small oil lamps on the Huangquan Road, standing at least a dozen meters high. The Qinghuang King, who had opened the final door, turned to Zhao Yunlun. I'll be honest with you now. This is the last of the 4 hallowed artifacts. The soul-guarding lamp. And that's what we have art of. And we all know I'm a whore for a lantern, so of course I'm going to enjoy this. There you go. Also, it's just beautiful art as per always. I'm trying to think. I can't quite remember what the lamp looked like in the show. But of course, it's been kind of ages, so no wonder I can't immediately recall. Like, I can't even remember if it was, like, to scale or not, or exactly what they chose the appearance. Wait, wasn't it something, like, really offensive that I needed immediately because, again, whore for lanterns? Probably. I feel like it was something, like, really gorgeous, and wasn't it kind of intricate? Ah, damn my memory. Despite the Wangchuan River's turmoil, it was oddly peaceful. Thousands of zhang below the Huangquan, where the Great Seal was. By this point, Lin Jing had escaped his bonds. He recited a water-repelling spell and circled around Shen Wei many times before climbing the ancient merit tree. Hold on, let me take a look. I must have a wire or something on me that I can use to pick the lock. No need, Shen Wei said calmly. All you need to do is pull the icicle from my chest. Lin Jing shuddered. Pull it out, won't you? I'll be fine, but thank you. Lin Jing's palms were a little sweaty. You said it, Shen Lasha, not me. If I fuck you up when pulling it out, Can you sign a waiver for me first? Shen Wei motioned for him to lean in closer. Confused, Lin Jing did as he asked. Right by his ear, Shen Wei murmured, You see, I'm actually... What Shen Wei said shocked Lin Jing so badly that his legs turned to jelly. He nearly fell right out of the tree. No longer daring to waste a moment, he respectfully grabbed hold of the icicle embedded in Shen Wei's chest. With a great shout, he yanked it free. There was a sound of tearing flesh as Shen Wei's torso was dragged forward along with the icicle, only to fall back upon hitting the limit of the chains securing his limbs. Lin Jing broke out in a sympathetic icy sweat, but Shen Wei didn't make a sound. Once the great length of ice, a meter long, was fully removed from his chest, a powerful gout of blood followed, spraying Lin Jing's face when he couldn't dodge in time. Expression tight with panic, Lin Jing hurried to check on Shen Wei. The pain of the extraction seemed to have been more than Shen Wei could bear. Hair was plastered to his forehead with cold sweat, and his gaze was empty and unfocused. Lin Jing, afraid he would faint again, reached out to pat his face, but then remembered that this was the soul-executing emissary. His extended hand couldn't quite make the landing. My lord? Can you hear me? Just hold on, I'll try to get you down as soon as possible. Blood loss had left Shen Wei's lips horribly dry and cracked. As he faded in and out of consciousness, they moved minutely. Voice faint and muffled, he called out, Kunlun. What? Shen Wei's gaze seemed lost for a while longer, then suddenly snapped back into perfect focus. My apologies. Could you, hand me that icicle? As he spoke, the brutal wound in his chest started to heal itself, little by little. The bloody hole in his shirt was soon the only remaining sign that he'd ever been hurt at all. Lin Jing hastily hefted the huge icicle with both hands. It was made of frozen water from the Wangchuan River, which likely explained why it seemed so much more piercingly cold than normal ice. As Lin Jing handed it over to Shen Wei, the ice melted all at once into a wisp of smoke with a blood-red tinge. In the next moment, Shen Wei swallowed it. The deep cracks in his lips closed over one by one. Light returned to his eyes, and then, with a few soft clinks, the chains binding his limbs gave way. Lin Jing leaned in close. My lord, are you all right now? What do we do? What about the Yochu from before, and that guy with the mask? Shen Wei laughed lightly. Oh, him? He's gone to investigate the scrap of chaos that I captured. I also prepared a little surprise for him in front of the Yanluo courts. Although he didn't understand, Lin Jing still found himself shuddering. As he gave Shen Wei a sidelong look, it occurred to him that Shen Lao She know that the soul-executing emissary and the masked man, despite their similar appearance, were worlds apart when it came to intelligence. Lin Jing thought of himself as pretty dumb. Shrewd, calculating people made him want to run and hide far away in case they sold him off without him even realizing while he was still helping to count the money. Shen Wei said, The waters of the Wangchuan River are above us. Swimming up, you'll reach the Huangquan Road. Yanlan is most likely in the netherworld, so let's go find him. Start swimming, and I'll follow. But don't mention anything about my whereabouts just yet. Oh, Lin Jing answered. He paused, but then couldn't help asking, Why not? If I appear, this play won't reach its conclusion, and then how would we redirect all the disaster to our enemies? Hearing this, Lin Jing started silently chanting scriptures. What had his boss been thinking, falling for someone who was as calculating as a calculator? It was probably a mistake he'd regret forever. That's a scene break. Let me see if we're nearing a chapter break soon. We are. Cool. So we'll take a break at the end of this chapter. Back in the mortal realm, it was already late at night. Chu Shujia and Go Chengcheng were searching the resort with flashlights, still stumbling now and then. Chu Shujia wore a tiny whistle around his neck, and as the two of them walked, the whistle blew all on its own at all sorts of pitches. It could evidently attract the souls of the dead. That's as good as a radio in my eyes. To go back to Silent Hill for a second. Chu Shujia felt as though, having had, granted, they do two different things. This attracts the souls of the dead. The radio alerts you to creepiness nearby. It's fallen under similar vibes. Chu Shujia felt as though, having had Go Chengcheng following him around for so long, he had become enough of a pacifist to go become a monk. All the world's calamities had nothing to do with him. Day in and day out he was emulating Lei Feng. Footnote: Lei Feng was a folk hero around the 1950s and 60s, touted by the state as a model of altruism. Day in and day out, he was emulating Lei Feng, one day trying to find a runaway girl at the highway exit and searching for lost souls in the dead of night the next. The whistle's pitch suddenly rose, a sound similar to that of the Chinese huamei bird. Chu Shujia raised a hand to stop Go Cheng Cheng. The two of them stood in the middle of a neglected pathway, listening as the whistle grew clearer and clearer. The notes rose and fell, the sound dragging out as though it were some kind of guiding siren. Go Cheng Cheng opened his eyes wide. Thanks to the cow's tears he'd applied, he saw a young person approaching from the end of the road, following the sound of the whistle. He was wearing a delivery company uniform and looked a little lost. Is that person human or a ghost? Said Chu Shujia. Go Cheng Cheng shivered instinctively, but the confusion on the young man's face wiped his fear away. Instead, his heart ached a little. Reaching them, the young person gave them a weird look, running a hand over his hair. Sirs, why are you still out here so late? It's so cold, you should hurry home. What about you? Chu Shujia countered. You should go back soon, too. The young men laughed. You're right, the guards already signed for the package I was delivering, and I don't need to collect any packages today, so I can go home a bit early. Chu Shujia took a little bottle from his pocket, opened it, and held it out. Get in, I'll take you home. The young man froze. The smile on his face gradually faded. He seemed deep in thought for a moment, as though suddenly coming to a realization. What's your name? Asked Go Cheng Cheng. The young man looked up slowly. Sounding confused, he said, My name is... What is my name? I don't remember. I remember. I've seen your ID. Your name is Feng Dawei, born in 1989. You turned 24 this year. You have an older brother, right? I wrote it all down, said Go Cheng Cheng. He took a notebook from his bag and flipped it open for Feng Dawei to see. Each missing person's details were meticulously recorded. Your brother said that if it turned out you were no longer among the living, he'd take care of your parents. They're very sad right now, but they'll be all right. Feng Dawei's eyes suddenly filled with tears. Come inside, Go Cheng Cheng urged. We'll send you off. You don't want to be out here when the sun rises. I've heard sunlight isn't good for you guys. Lowering his head, Feng Dawei wiped at his tears. I'm dead, aren't I? Go Cheng Cheng hesitated, then nodded. How did I die? Did someone kill me? If the murderer is caught, will we be avenged? Choked up, Go Cheng Cheng had no idea how to respond. Instead, it was Chu Shujia's low voice that answered, No evildoer can escape. Don't worry. For a long while, Feng Dawei stared down at the little bottle. But how could I just die? I wasn't done living. Come in, said Chu Shujia. Let's get you a better life in your next incarnation. Feng Dawei laughed bitterly. Next life? Forget about the next life. Can you take a message to my parents and brother? Go Cheng Cheng hurriedly got his notebook back out and carefully wrote, Message to pass along, on Feng Dawei's page in his childish handwriting. Go ahead. With a sniffle, Feng Dawei began to talk. He said a whole bunch of random, useless things, and Go Cheng Cheng faithfully recorded every last word. Once they were finished, he showed Feng Dawei what he'd written. The young man read his own message aloud, following along with Go Cheng Cheng's finger on the page. Finally, he smiled, albeit with a little difficulty. Okay. I can rest easy now. There's nothing more I can do anyway. Bro, you're a good person. Thank you. Taking a deep breath, he suddenly swooped into Chu Shujia's bottle. Chu Shujia closed the lid on it and put it in his pocket, then turned to Go Cheng Cheng. Let's go find the next one. Go Cheng Cheng followed. After a few steps, Chu Shujia suddenly spoke again, without even turning to look back at him. You're doing great. The tiniest compliment had always been able to make Go Cheng Cheng light up. This sudden praise made him glow like the peak of spring. At that moment, a howling arose, uncomfortably close by. It turned out to be a few low-level Gwei that had remained in the mortal realm. The creatures launched themselves at the pair, jaws agape as they followed the smell of fresh blood and flesh. I'm sorry, awful things are happening, and I'm still back on the best boy having a praise kink. Chu Shuja shoved Go Cheng Chung behind him and brought his foot up in a sweeping horizontal kick. He struck the nearest Gui in the chest with a low thud. The Gui stumbled back a few steps and fell on its ass. 3 or 4 more Gui grew bolder at once, despite seeing this. They rushed forward, shoulder to shoulder. Chu Shuja pushed Go Cheng Chung in the chest. Stay away. I'm normal. But before the Corpse King, who had been emulating Lei Feng for many days, could stretch his muscles and start to really show off, someone landed in front of him. It was a youth holding a long skewer, which he turned on the Gui. He stabbed him swiftly and precisely, as if making Tonghulu? Possibly? In the blink of an eye, he had created a truly revolting barbecue stick of low-level Yochu. No one would have called the young man pretty. His appearance suggested that his parents hadn't put much effort into making him, but his smile radiated absolute sincerity. He withdrew his sharp skewer, wiped it on the ground, and then approached Chu Shuja. Hey, friend, are you all right? Still somewhat stuck in his own edgy teenager phase, being around strangers always made Chu Shuja defensive. His brow furrowed as the young man walked closer. Fortunately, the stranger was observant. Seeing Chu Shuja's dark expression, he stopped and kept his distance. His friendly smile never wavering. I'm a rogue cultivator. I sensed something off around here, so I came to check things out. Don't misunderstand, bro. Chu Shuja gave a slight nod, all cold arrogance. He turned and called to Go Cheng Chung. Shogo, let's go. Go Cheng Chung ran over at once, but the young man tagged along, uninvited. Perhaps seeing that Chu Shuja was wary and didn't like talking to people, he turned his attention to Go Cheng Chung instead. What were those monsters just now? Why aren't there any people here? Do you guys know what happened? This was more questions than Go Cheng Chung was used to being asked all at once. It was easy for him to lose track of the order they'd been asked in, and once his brain got muddled, it was hard for him to think. I'm not sure either, he replied with a timid look. Then what do you guys do? We're police, Go Cheng Chung said. Oh, really? Surprise flooded the young man's expression, but he started to chat with Go Cheng Chung naturally. Chu Shuja stayed silent and listened to them talk, not dropping his guard for a moment. Only a dumbass like Go Cheng Chung would lower their guard when a friendly rogue cultivator appeared in a place like this. The stranger had a knack for conversation. In just a few sentences, he realized that words didn't come easily for Go Cheng Chung, so he changed his approach at once. Rather than asking question after question, he started chatting casually about the resort, periodically sneaking in a few questions about their backgrounds. And this goes to show you, I guess, just the kind of shit that I watch and read. But I'm over here like, because he's unnamed, he's just like, this stranger has shown up and is all of a sudden just super chatty and helpful and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, there is no reason for this to be Ghostface, but my brain goes, plot twist, Ghostface. See, periodically sneaking in a few questions about their backgrounds, though. Not that Ghostface would need to do this. As they walked, they collected 6 or 7 more souls. It wasn't long at all before they'd entirely filled 2 small bottles. In the darkness, the bottles glowed richly with different colors. Chu Shuja tucked them side by side in his fanny pack and got out another empty one. The Corpse King had an extreme personality and was cold by nature. Necromancy was a deviation from the norm to begin with, not accepted by the world. Chu Shuja was lonesome and arrogant, wholly unconcerned about his merits, so he never paid it any mind. He'd always thought morality was a facade, nothing but an excuse to hide behind. The purer and more beautiful something seemed, the darker it might be beneath. Despite this cynical outlook on the world, he somehow managed to put up with Go Cheng Chung. Maybe by now it was just habit. Either way, looking at the soul bottles in his bag stirred an inexplicable feeling in his heart. It made him grumble that Go Cheng Chung was being too kind for no reason, even as Chu Shuja followed him around to collect lost souls. I'm as much of a sucker for grumpy and sunshine as the next person. I don't know what you want from me. There were plenty of Gui wandering around the little resort. The unfamiliar cultivator kept helping them clear out any Yochu in their way. He was quick and merciless, raising Chu Shuja's guard even more. So when the cultivator started asking about the soul guarding order, the Corpse King naturally gave him a chilly response. Sir, if something is none of your business, maybe you shouldn't be asking. Why be annoying for no reason? Go Cheng Cheng just laughed, embarrassed. Sorry, Chuga is a very good person. He doesn't really mean it like it sounds. It's just that we have regulations. The easygoing cultivator nodded repeatedly. No worries, it's my bad for asking too much. Sorry, bro. I have no filter. It must be annoying sometimes. You're not annoyed with me. Emphasis on the correct syllables. You're not annoyed with me, are you, little bro? How could I be? Go Cheng Cheng immediately asked. You've helped us so much. When we get back to the when we get back to the county, can I read? When we get back to the county, we'll treat you to dinner. You're a good person. But just then, they passed a little store. The young man's profile was facing the display window, and he was talking with a dazzling smile. But from the corner of his eye, Go Cheng Cheng happened to glimpse the reflection in the glass. What he saw there shocked and alarmed him. This kind, warm friend's reflection was that of a monster Go Cheng Cheng had never seen before. Pitch black all over, with different heads constantly surging in and out of its shoulders. In the window, its mouth was opened savagely in Go Cheng Cheng's direction, a mouth bristling with fangs that resembled ancient torture devices. The little baton in Go Cheng Cheng's pocket reacted before he could even make a sound. Flames erupted toward the kind-looking youth. Chu Shujia turned back, stunned, only to see Go Cheng Cheng just standing there helplessly. The kind-hearted cultivator, however, had sprung back a good dozen meters, effortlessly landing on the roof of a house. Chu Shujia knew Go Cheng Cheng couldn't control the baton. Anything the contraption did was an instinctive reaction to his fear. Stuffing the glass bottle back into his bag, Chu Shujia narrowed his eyes and stared icily at the person on the rooftop. What happened? The young man on the roof was no longer smiling. He looked down at Go Cheng Cheng. Yeah, friend, he echoed. What happened? Go Cheng Cheng stumbled over his words. His shadow. Chu Shujia turned on his flashlight. The cultivator's lonely shadow had nowhere to hide from the light, but no matter how carefully Chu Shujia looked, he didn't see anything wrong. The cultivator squatted on the roof, letting him look all he wanted. Calm and collected, he asked, What's wrong with my shadow? With Chu Shujia giving him a confused expression, Go Cheng Cheng was at a loss for words. The young man shook his head with a sigh. My efforts have truly gone to waste. I've been helping you guys all this time, and I don't need thanks. But if I hadn't been quick just now, would I have died at this little bro's hands, even though he seems so honest and kind? Chu Shujia's forehead creased. At that moment, the whistle around his neck went silent. Footsteps rustled in the distance, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. In the darkness, it was hair-raising. Goosebumps prickled to life all over Go Cheng Cheng's neck. And then a huge Yochu's head burst up out of the ground, right between the cultivator and the two of them, coming face to face with Go Cheng Cheng. It seemed that the great seal was straining more and more. The Gui wandering the mortal world drew closer and closer to the city and streets, following the scent of fresh flesh and blood. Meanwhile, in the county less than 50 kilometers away, people were still completely clueless. End of the chapter. We're going to go ahead and take our break now. We're on page 263 for chapter 21. We're going to take the first break. I'm literally just hopping up, zapping my tea, fixing my makeup a little bit, and then sitting back down. So I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Leaving on that ominous note, a few minutes, please. And we're back. Somebody asked what tea I'm drinking. I am almost always drinking Twining's chai, and they actually have like an extra spicy chai. That's almost always what I'm drinking, if not this peach probiotic thing that I can't remember which company makes it. But most of the time, especially if it's like the first cup of tea that you see me with, it is virtually always Twining's chai. I am quite the fan, and especially useful in these days because chai is actually a tea that's good for the throat. The specific spices that come with it are nice for a sore throat. So, we are on page 263 for chapter 21. The Qingguang King's expression was grave. Guardian, haven't you realized? The Great Seal is broken. The sole executing emissary guarded it for so many years, but now we have no idea where he is, or even whether he still lives. The small lamps on the Huangquan Road, I almost said river, the Huangquan Road, can only buy us a bit of time. As things stand, it appears that the Netherworld will be the first to fall, followed by the mortal realm. Please calm yourself. I assure you, I'd never test you in this manner under less extraordinary circumstances. But now we should work as one to get through this catastrophe together. They're offering the carrot after the stick, Zhao Yunlan thought. He kept his face studiously blank as he released the magistrate, but he didn't lower his gun. Taking another look at the ethereal soul-guarding lamp, glowing with unearthly energy, he said, "What exactly would the Qingguang King have me do?" The Qingguang King sighed. The soul-guarding lamp was formed from the body of the mountain god of the great wild, Kunlun. It calms souls and drives away evil. It is the last and greatest protection the four pillars have, but... Another sigh. Guardian, please take a look. As he spoke, he tried to lead Zhao Yunlan to the edge of the pool containing the lamp, but Zhao Yunlan didn't budge. The Qingguang King, feeling a little awkward under Zhao Yunlan's icy stare, gestured with his hands. In response, the soul-guarding lamp slowly floated up out of the water and rotated toward them. It even tilted forward slightly, displaying its lack of wick. Having reached this point, let us lay our cards on the table, said the Qingguang King. It's true that this humble god has treated Kunlun Jun disrespectfully in the past, but please, on account of this one's lowly rank and tireless efforts to protect the three realms, show mercy. The sudden change in how the Qingguang King addressed Zhao Yunlan was a shock for Zhu Hong. She turned to Zhao Yunlan, but as usual, his face betrayed nothing. When he replied, Zhao Yunlan's smile was laced with mockery. I can't say you seem much more respectful now. Why did you keep the magistrate from taking me to see the reincarnation cycle? And given how many secrets the Yanluo kings know, how could you not know it was Shenong who sealed Kunlun's memory and powers? I want to find the reincarnation cycle that he left behind and awaken Kunlun's divine spirit. If I do, I might even be able to help you deal with that overbearing ghost face outside. So why stop me? The Qingguang King wouldn't meet his gaze. This humble god acted out of line. He hedged. The problem isn't how you acted, Zhao Yunlan interrupted. It's that you dared to do something you shouldn't have. You knew Kunlun's divine spirit hadn't awakened because the soul-guarding lamp remained unlit, right? The Qingguang King looked everywhere but at him. This... Even if it did awaken, a divine spirit that's been sealed in a mortal body for hundreds of lifetimes has probably lost most of its power. I'd guess it's pretty much useless, huh? Laughing awkwardly, the Qingguang King replied, How could the mountain god say such a thing? Zhao Yunlan's smile didn't reach his eyes. If you won't say it, I will. The Qingguang King has been hinting that the soul-guarding lamp was formed from my body. You've been working your way up to saying that the lamp's wick was Kunlun Jun's heart's blood, haven't you? I think you brought me here planning to extract a vial of it from my heart. Well? Zhu Hong stood behind Zhao Yunlan silently, fixing the Qingguang King with a hostile glower. With these words, the last shred of civility was ripped away. The other Yanluo kings landed before him. The flutter of their colorful robes in the air was like a flock of parrots swooping down. It is our hope that the mountain god's noble character will have you consider the bigger picture. With only the barest hint of a smile, Zhao Yunlan looked back at them. Zhu, on the other hand, exploded. The lower half of her body transformed into a giant snake's tail, coiling around Zhao Yunlan, the delicate corners of her eyes elongated to reveal a cold-blooded animal's vertical pupils. Pupils. I'm too excited. Don't you know he's just a mortal? She demanded. Unfazed, Zhao Yunlan answered for them. They're not blind. Of course they know. Besides, would they dare try to force my hand like this if I weren't mortal? Zhu's scales were as red as blood. When she hissed in fury, her scarlet forked tongue flickered out. Why not just say you want to take his life? Zhao Yunlan snorted. Just think how bad that would sound. All mortals age and die, chorused the 10 kings. It is a normal part of the reincarnation cycle. That's right. It's nothing but a mortal body. Can't you give it up to save the world? This time, Zhao Yunlan laughed loudly. As he did, the ground quaked ever more violently, and the shadow beneath the Huangtuan River struggled with increasing ferocity. The little lamps lining the Huangquan Road teetered on the verge of falling. The violent ghosts that had escaped Ghost City were wreaking havoc everywhere, and some were trying to force their way into the halls of the Yanluo courts. Oxhead and Horseface, standing on either side, held the doors shut. My lord, we can't hold them back much longer. Now Zhao Yunlan sighed. Softly, he said, I'd just like to remind you all it's not wise to burn all your bridges at once. Zhu transformed the rest of the way into a giant python, her gleaming red scales bristling in rage. She lunged toward the Qingguan king, the nearest of the 10, and tried to bite him. A few reapers rushed forward and shielded him with pitchforks and large blades. The Qingguan king pointed at Zhao Yunlan. Seize him! A cold voice pierced the air. Seize whom? A crowd of Yao rushed in. Every last one was either a tribe leader or an elder. Fourth Uncle gave Zhu a stern glance, but to her surprise, he said nothing. Then Fourth Uncle, who had been born in the zodiac year that corresponded to his own tribe, stepped out from the crowd. He first bowed solemnly to Zhao Yunlan. Mountain God, this humble Yao was a fool who failed to recognize the grace of your presence. Of course, since even the Crow tribe had known perfectly well whom Zhao Yunlan was the reincarnation of, it was hard to say whether the Snake tribe leader had truly been unaware or if he'd been feigning ignorance. Either way, Zhao Yunlan didn't call him out. He just nodded, with a tiny smile. Fourth Uncle continued in righteous tones. The Netherworld controls the reincarnation cycle and has always been rude and arrogant to cultivators from all walks of life. We can forget everything else you've done, but the Yao are deeply indebted to Kunlun Jun. No matter how incompetent we might be, we could never permit you to treat the reincarnation of the ancient god with such impudence. What do the Yao mean by this? The Qingguan king demanded. The Crow tribe elder, who had so clearly severed her tribe from the other Yao, but was now back in the fray for some reason, had tagged along at the back of the crowd. Hoarsely, she said, If there is blame to be assigned, it belongs to the Yanluo king's betrayal. They're too dishonest. Fourth Uncle's brow furrowed. He hadn't wanted to be so blunt, and now that the quiet part had been said out loud, he didn't know how to proceed. At this point, more voices piped up from the doorway. Old man Yanluo, we all followed you up Kunlun Mountain in a collective bid to defeat the king of the Gui, but you stabbed all of us in the back. What do you have to say for yourselves? It was the 3 pure ones of Taoism speaking. The Netherworld's shamelessness knows no bounds. We know now why you had us all gather atop Kunlun Mountain. You secretly put a mark on each of us to attract the chaos within the place of great disrespect when it spilled over. You ensured everyone would suffer together. If the Netherworld had even an ounce of conscience, wouldn't you have kept it securely underground? By now, everyone who was anyone seemed to be there, even the Arhats of the West, and unaffiliated immortals from all the land. The Qingguan king was furious. The Great Seal splintering is a catastrophe for all 3 realms. Why should the Netherworld bear the burden alone? Saying that was like stirring up a nest of hornets. All the great immortals started to argue with the Yanluo courts, yelling over each other. At that moment, the black shadow beneath the Wangchuan River rose dozens of meters. Every single oil lamp went dark at once. A scream rang out. Gui! A small group of Gui were the first to float out of the water. There weren't many of them, but their appearance jabbed right at everyone's tightly wound nerves. And then, as luck would have it, Ghostface, too, appeared in the Wangchuan River. In reality, the Great Seal was on the verge of collapse, but had yet to truly break. The current uproar in the Netherworld was due entirely to the fact that Shen Wei had released the bit of chaos he'd captured into the Yanluo courts, feeding into Ghostface's neurotic paranoia. Shen Wei's ambiguous comments under the ancient merit tree had made Ghostface immediately suspect that Shen Wei was conspiring to make use of that scrap of captured chaos. Ghostface had tracked his own trail of chaos there. The very instant he surfaced from the water and saw the scene on shore, he realized he'd been duped, but it was already too late to leave. Chaos King of the Gui, someone yelled. The Qingguang King, who was almost surrounded, immediately took advantage of the situation. Look, the King of the Gui has already emerged. Is now really the time to debate who's right and who's wrong? As if on cue, the choir of the 10 Kings rushed to harmonize with him. If you can all still see the big picture here, then please, let's set aside our prejudices and band together to deal with the Gui. Valid, but also not a scapegoat? I feel like they're trying to use a bigger threat to be like, well, what we've done doesn't really matter. We've got to fight this thing. And it's like, yeah, sure. But after we deal with this thing, we're still going to come around back to you, you know. Where even? In the blink of an eye, Ghostface was surrounded. He shot several meters higher above the river and whistled. Countless Gui answered his summons, bursting forth from the Wangchuan waters. The chaos that could swallow everything formed a huge blockade behind them. The Yanluo courts had become a battlefield, inside and out. Worry for her fourth uncle made Zhu Hong try to join the other Yao, but Zhao Yunlan held her back. Take a good look at the class of fighters out there. Don't get underfoot, little girl. A high-level Gui on a killing spree. Why do I feel like that was him kind of low-key just trying to protect her? Like, he couched it in condescending terms. But a high-level Gui on a killing spree suddenly came dangerously close to Zhao Yunlan. He fired off a shot, but the Gui managed to dodge. He was just about to take aim again when a familiar bell rang behind him. Lin Jing, who had been missing for several days, unexpectedly appeared and tossed out several talismans marked with swastikas. The swastika is a Sanskrit symbol representing the auspicious footprints of the Buddha. Oh, that's funny. I had heard it as just rather flatly explained as a symbol of hope. That, of course, got perverted at one particular point in history. But I don't think I'd heard it as representing the auspicious footprints of the Buddha. Huh. You learn something new every day. The Gui disappeared at once in a curl of black smoke. Lin Jing dragged Zhao Yunlan toward the secret chamber that held the soul-guarding lamp. Heads are getting bashed in left and right. What are you two hanging around here for? Zhao Yunlan studied him, expression inscrutable. Were you the one who yelled Chaos King of the Gui just now? Lin Jing hesitated. I tried to pitch my voice higher. Pitch your voice higher? I'd know your voice even if it were breaking. A storm cloud descended on Zhao Yunlan's face. Shen Wei, get the fuck out here! In response, Shen Wei slowly slipped out from behind the chamber's massive stone door. He looked far more anxious now than he had a moment ago, during all his scheming and plotting. When Zhao Yunlan's gaze fell on the crusted blood on Shen Wei's chest, his fist clenched hard enough that veins popped out on the back of his hand. He looked like he wanted to hit Shen Wei. Instantaneously, Lin Jing reacted, grabbing Zhu Hong and covering her mouth as soon as Shen Wei appeared. Despite her confusion, he pulled her off to the side. Zhao Yunlan stayed silent for a long time, and Shen Wei's anxiety grew by the second. Finally, Zhao Yunlan spoke. Shen Wei. Shen Wei was instantly reminded of Zhao Yunlan's exhausted words after he'd seen through Shen Wei's deception in the Great Divine Tree. If you keep doing this, I'll really be angry with you. Panicked, Shen Wei took a step toward him. "Stay over there," Zhao Yunlan said, voice very low. "Don't come over here yet. It's not time for you to reveal yourself." As if frozen, Shen Wei stood stiffly in place. Zhu Hong, who was still completely in the dark, turned to Lin Jing. "What does he mean? It's not time for him to reveal himself," she asked blankly. "Why not?" "Amitabha, don't worry about it," came Lin Jing's calm response. Zhu Hong shut her mouth. Zhao Yunlan pointed at the bloody mess on Shen Wei's chest. "Does it hurt?" Shen Wei began to nod, but he only made it as far as lowering his chin before pausing and quickly shaking his head. In the end, not knowing how to answer, he could only give Zhao Yunlan a pitiful look. Sizing up the situation at once, Lin Jing asked, "How could it not hurt? He passed out twice from the pain." Zhao Yunlan inhaled sharply, expression dark. Lin Jing developed a sudden keen interest in the ongoing battle. He tugged on Zhu Hong's arm and pointed, "Look, benefactress, they're fighting." "I hold the power of the mountains and rivers," Shen Wei hurried to explain. "So in truth, the mountain river all was always under my control. I arranged for it to appear near Qingshu village to lure Ghostface and place a mark on him. Then I tricked him into using the soul-tempering cauldron to summon the great merit brush, leading him to use the 3-life rock as the hearthstone for the cauldron on Kunlun Mountain. The only thing he had that was made from the 3-life rock was the reincarnation dial, and it, along with the merit brush, is connected to one of the corporeal souls of every living being. As long as he used the stone from the reincarnation dial as the hearthstone, the two would be connected through the soul-tempering cauldron. Meanwhile, the mountain river all was the best lock. Through the mark I'd left on Ghostface, the all locked onto both the reincarnation dial and the merit brush at the same time. That means the whole time, Ghostface has been running around doing all this work for someone else's benefit. Even the merit brush I got then was a dupe, wasn't it? Which means you already held 3 of the 4 hollowed artifacts in your hands," Zhao Yunlan said slowly. "And on the peak of Kunlun Mountain, when the Netherworld had gathered everyone there, you also left marks on them all, right? That way, as soon as the chaos beneath the seal began to leak out, everyone got a taste of it, so no one could escape unscathed, and they'd all think it was the Netherworld's doing." This is a nice little turning on its head. Because normally, we find out in stories like this that it's been like the main villain has gotten the heroes to be their patsies the whole time, and everything they were doing was actually helping out the big bad, right? So in another version of the story, it would be a reveal that Ghostface had been pulling these strings the whole time. But not so much here, which is an extremely interesting thing to put on one of the protagonists and one half of the main couple. Shen Wei opened his hand, revealing a long strand of hair on his palm. He waved, and the pitch black hair Zhao Yunlan loved so much floated up before his eyes. A profoundly inauspicious black smoke seeped from it, identical to the chaos that Ghostface was collecting. Reaching out, Shen Wei pinched the strand out of the air. Back in his palm, it broke into several pieces. He confessed his crimes freely. "This is the mark. All along, Ghostface had been challenging the relationship between you, me, and the Netherworld. Without a wick and the soul-guarding lamp, the Netherworld would descend into panic if the Great Seal broke early, and they would undoubtedly try to take your heart's blood by force. By that point, the Netherworld and I would have inevitably fallen out, giving Ghostface the opportunity to strengthen the Gwei to break out of the Great Seal. Therefore, I knew he would try to collect the power of chaos to falsely give the seal the appearance of breaking." Zhao Yunlan nodded. "I should have realized when you split the ground open at the resort. You are the keeper of the Great Seal. If even I could tell that it was only a ghost army summons and not the Great Seal actually shattering, how could you not know? You knew from the very beginning that Ghostface was up to no good, but you still let him skewer you with an icicle. What is wrong with you?" Shen Wei said nothing. "Don't play dead. Answer me." "At the time, Shen Wei hesitated. Pitifully, he tried again. Zhao Yunlan interrupted him. As the keeper of the seal, of course you could tell whether it was really broken. That meant you had to let him get the drop on you, and you had to go missing. Also, the netherworld and everyone affected by the shards of chaos would be thrown into a frenzy. Along the way, I bet you made sure to tell Ghostface that he'd fallen for all your schemes. Given how suspicious and paranoid he is, he would have thought that meant something was up with the bit of chaos you took. He would have had to come check it out, running smack into the netherworld officials and various immortals out there, right? All your little redirects sure worked out well for you, huh? Eavesdropping off to the side, Lin Jing finally understood. So that's what happened, he muttered. Zhao Yunlan gave a cold laugh. My lord truly took everything into... Before he finished his sentence, Shen Wei disappeared. Zhao Yunlan had the unmistakable sense of someone invisibly drawing closer. Unseen hands pressed against the rocky wall on either side of his body. Then an icy hand closed around his fist. Still invisible, Shen Wei murmured in his ear, I'm right here. If you're upset, then hit me. I won't evade it. Though Zhao Yunlan flung his hand off, before he could walk away, Shen Wei grabbed him tightly, pinning him against the rough wall. Let go, Zhao Yunlan demanded. He twisted to one side and pushed, only to hear Shen Wei let out a muffled noise of pain. Belatedly remembering Shen Wei's chest wound, Zhao Yunlan immediately stopped shoving and felt for Shen Wei's chest, touching the dried crust of blood on his clothes. You... Shen Wei's hand closed over Zhao Yunlan's, pressing it into his chest. Zhao Yunlan took a deep breath. He looked back at the lifeless soul-guarding lamp, floating above the water, and his face went blank as he slowly pulled his hand from Shen Wei's grasp. He turned to Lin Jing and Zhu Hong. The soul-executing emissary doesn't miscalculate. He has everything under control, and the Great Seal is still holding up. We're done here. Let's go. We've got to put in overtime and write up a report. Having been forced to witness his boss's continuing Cold War with his spouse, Lin Jing felt incredibly awkward. He took his best stab at cracking a joke. We just got back to work, and we're already doing overtime? It'll be the Long Taito festival soon, so aren't we going to get any gifts? Sure, Zhao Yunlan said, not batting an eye. Everyone's getting 10 kilos of monk meat. Lin Jing slapped himself in the face. Amitabha, why did I say anything? Suddenly, Zhu Hong spoke up. Director Zhao, I have to stay. My fourth uncle is still here. Oh, Zhao Yunlan considered that. It seemed reasonable, so he nodded. Okay, just keep your distance from the action and be careful. Without a backward glance, he left with Lin Jing. Zhu Hong watched them go. They worked well together, stealthily leaving the battlefield by skirting its edges and not drawing attention to themselves. Finally, she let out a breath of relief, then tentatively addressed the empty air beside her. Lord Emissary, are you still there? What is it? Asked a desolate male voice. Zhu Hong was momentarily speechless, then jumped up. Why are you still here? After a silence, Shen Wei quietly asked, Where am I supposed to go? Incredulous, Zhu Hong said, Why didn't you leave with them? Shen Wei fell silent again. Lord Emissary? She called out. Shen Lasha? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Are you still there? He probably doesn't want me to follow him. Shen Wei's voice came from below the soul-guarding lamp. Zhu Hong couldn't help taking a few steps toward him, only to hear, he said if I lied to him again, he'd be truly angry with me. You've lied to him? She exclaimed, eyes wide and mouth agape. Then, without waiting for an answer, she shook the thought from her head. No, never mind that. The point is, you believed him. Shen Wei, hiding behind the lamp, wasn't afraid of being seen. He allowed a hazy silhouette of himself to become visible. The look he gave Zhu Hong was a little lost. Zhu Hong heaved a sigh. Look, I'm not the brightest. I don't understand what you guys are plotting half the time. Those conspiracies all seem very cool, but Zhao Yunlan has threatened to make stew out of Daqing at least 99 times, if not 100 by now. And yet that stupid cat is still living his best life, isn't he? Just getting fatter all the time? In her wildest dreams, Zhuhong never dared imagine being the one to teach the soul-executing emissary a lesson like this. The emissary, the love rival she couldn't win against. The thought both pleased her and made her jealous. I arrived just in time to see Ghostface drag you off, and I can tell you, he looked like he wanted to cut Ghostface into a million pieces. After all these years around him, I can tell you at a single glance if he's genuinely angry or if it's just his temper flaring up. Why do you think he's angry? Because you hid things from him? Because you lied to him? Shen Wei, I really think... Never mind. I'm not thinking about it, not that I dare to. But I mean, if you ran away from home and worried your mother sick, and she slapped you a couple of times after you were found, wouldn't you deserve that? Bewildered, Shen Wei just stared back at her. The two of them looked at each other for a while, and then Zhuhong abruptly turned away. Sorry, she said stiffly. I forgot you don't have a mom. It's all right, said Shen Wei. Zhuhong had no idea how to respond. There was an awkward silence between them until, after a while, Shen Wei suddenly spoke again. You care deeply for him, don't you? The question made Zhuhong feel as if something had been stuffed into her heart. Yeah, she mumbled. Then why did you tell me all this? Zhuhong rolled her eyes. I just want you to stop upsetting him. Confusion flickered across Shen Wei's face for just a second. He seemed somewhat distracted, his brows knit together, and the glittering water of the pool beneath the soul-guarding lamp reflected in his eyes. Zhuhong had just about concluded that his soul had drifted away when he finally looked back and nodded at her. You're right, he said sincerely. Many thanks. Standing up, Shen Wei made himself invisible once again. Zhuhong heard his footsteps approach, and then he said, Miss Zhu, please give me your hand. Zhuhong didn't know what he wanted, but extended her hand anyway. As she watched, Shen Wei placed a palm-sized branch in it. The branch had 2 tiny buds of green. Such a small branch wasn't heavy, of course, but somehow Zhuhong felt as if this unassuming twig contained an extraordinary weight. What is... A branch from the great divine tree on Kunlun Mountain, Shen Wei said. In all the time since the world was first split, only Nuwa has ever taken a branch from the great divine tree. She planted one of them thousands of jung below the Huangquan, where it became the ancient merit tree. This is the second branch. Take care of it. That's a hell of a reward that she deserves, really. Because it takes, it takes a particularly mature person to do what she just did. And extend grace and give some vital information to someone who has something that you desperately want and you will never ever get because they have it. That takes a certain fabulousness of person, And even when you have a certain fabulousness of person, it's still difficult. Zhuhong stumbled, nearly dropping it. She quickly clutched it in both hands and raised it to her eyes with reverence and awe. She looked as though she wanted to place it on an altar and worship it. The branch of the great divine tree failed to thrive when it was planted in the place of great disrespect, most likely because the existence of the Gui is anathema to it. Throughout all the years I've stood in Kunlun's stead, I've done my very best, but I've been unable to care for it well. Millennia have passed, and this branch's 2 small buds are all I have to show for my efforts. I've always regretted that deeply, Shen Wei said. Your 4th uncle may not have the time to worry about you right now. Hide here and stay away from them. If you face danger, each bud will save your life once. After a pause, Shen Wei continued. If you don't use them, then once the dust settles, please plant it somewhere with beautiful mountains and flowing water. He sounded as if he was leaving his last words. Zhuhong asked, Where are you going? I'm going to pursue him. Does he still need to be pursued? Juhong set aside her confusion for a moment. Jealously, she said, "That bastard may have left easily, but now that his anger's spurned away, he's probably full of regret, and waiting for you just up ahead." The invisible Shen Wei didn't respond. Perhaps he had already left. Juhong's guess was right on the money. Zhao Yunlan hadn't gone far at all. He'd found a hiding spot by the opening of the Huangquan Road, and there he squatted, a growing number of cigarette butts littering the ground at his feet. Afraid of bearing the brunt of his anger, Lin Jing kept his distance. He was observing the fury of the battlefield with a pair of binoculars he'd scrounged from somewhere. Zhao Yunlan had just lit his 12th cigarette when a hand reached out from nowhere, snuffed it out, and snatched it from his mouth. Zhao Yunlan froze, then slowly turned to see Shen Wei standing there hesitantly, looking as though he wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. Shen Wei looked, frankly, terrible. He was covered in blood. His glasses had long since fallen off somewhere. The hair on his forehead was a little long, brushing the bridge of his nose and nearly covering his eyes. This is supposed to be him looking terrible. All in all, he was a pathetic sight. He fidgeted with the cigarette he'd grabbed from Zhao Yunlan like a kid who was in trouble and was afraid to go home. There was a long silence. Finally, Zhao Yunlan let out a resigned sigh and opened his arms. "Come here," he said, and Shen Wei pulled him into a tight embrace. Even a dog would go blind, seeing this, Lin Jing thought to himself. He pretended to not exist. Having decided to see no evil, Lin Jing could only focus on the battle. It was like the various tribes and factions had come to a tacit understanding and were using the many reapers of the netherworld as cannon fodder, pushing them to the forefront where Ghostface and the Gwei could see them. By that point, more than half of the reapers had been injured or killed. Nevertheless, even tiny shards of chaos were still tremendously harmful. Immortals and Gwei alike had to avoid the sharp edge of its destruction. Occasionally, someone was unable to evade it and was swallowed silently, leaving behind not even a single hair. After all, wasn't the whole point of chaos to return everything to nothing? As Lin Jing watched, the Qingquan King was backed into a dire corner by a shard of chaos. With a splash, he fell into the Wangchuan River, where his huge sleeves pulled him to the surface and kept him afloat. A vast net emerged from the surface of the water, lifting the Qingquan King into the air. Sopping wet, he scrambled and stumbled onto the shore, only to see the best of each tribe, standing in the positions of Fusha's Bagua, setting up a huge array. "Amitabha, what array is that?" Lin Jing murmured. From behind him, Shen Wei's voice said, "That's Fusha's Bagua net." Lin Jing was so startled that his hands shook, nearly dropping his binoculars. Shen Wei kept talking. "The Yao probably brought it. Legend says that Fusha was born in the eastern lands. Once he was elevated into a sage, Chiyo took over the eastern lands, and after Chiyo came the Wu and the Yao. Then, when Fusha died, he left behind the Fusha bow and Bagua. The bow was taken by Hoya of the Wu and eventually found its way into human hands. As for the Bagua net, it's probably a closely guarded secret of the Yao. Unsurprisingly, each race has a hidden trump card." As the Bagua net floated out of the water, the shard of chaos seemed to retreat for the first time. Far overhead, the expression on Ghostface's mask twisted. A sudden golden light exploded from the Bagua net. Lin Jing, shocked, exclaimed, "That's Buddha's golden seal that we worship in the West, the legendary final treasure to suppress evil and monsters at the end of time." Before the sound of his voice had even begun to fade, the golden light flooded the entire netherworld. The little lamps on the Huangquan Road, having been extinguished at some point, were lit once more. This time their flames were far brighter, as if a dragon of fire were snaking along the Huangquan Road, waving its tail. Oh, shit. Okay. The piece of chaos, along with countless Gwei, was sucked into Fusha's Bagua net in an instant. Shen Wei sighed softly. "Everything is settled. Let's go." From the moment Fusha's Bagua net had appeared, the winners and losers had already been decided. The battle was over. With the sound of acknowledgement, Lin Jing got to his feet, but a strange feeling still lurked in his heart, a sense that something was about to happen. Before leaving, he unthinkingly lifted his binoculars for a final look and got a crystal-clear view of the expression on Ghostface's mask, the expression of someone laughing even though he wanted to cry. "Close enough. Everybody take a drink." An instant later, the mask split in two. The halves fell, revealing the face that was a gloomy mirror of Shen Wei's. Ghostface's robe billowed like a flag in the wind, despite the still air. Very well, Lin Jing heard him say hoarsely. You win. I can't beat you. You don't even deign to fight me. Very well. Shen Wei stopped. You and I were born... We have to... let's do the art first. Let's do the art first before we get into this monologuing disaster. Okay. Yeah. That's what we're looking at. He's just a slightly crazy expression. Just a little manic. A little wild. A little desperate. A little unhinged. Just a little bit. Just some. Whew. You and I were born exactly the same. I don't understand how I was inferior to you. You're the solitary, noble, soul-executing emissary, while I'm the king of the Gwei everyone wants to kill. That's all fine. Ghostface gave a guttural laugh. I merely hate that you're too despicable and cowardly to even fight me, instead choosing to humiliate me with these ants. You'll regret this. You think you've won without dirtying your hands? Yes, you'll regret this, my good brother. Breaking into gales of laughter, Ghostface's body suddenly grew vast, several dozens of meters, as tall as a mountain. From thousands of kilometers away, a muffled roar sounded deep beneath the ground. It rumbled like thunder as it rose to the surface. Shen Wei's expression suddenly changed. Ghostface seemed nearly manic. Then, abruptly, he exploded. His body flew apart into tens of thousands of pieces. At the same moment, seemingly in response, Fusha's Bagua net, which contained the shard of chaos, broke. End of chapter, I guess. Whew. Whew. All right. How many? We are on page 283 for chapter 22. This is the last chapter of the day, which means that this chapter should also be a little bit longer than usual. Go Chung Chung clutched the little baton Zhao Yunlan had given him in a death grip. He was still reeling from the extreme terror. Actually, if this is the last chapter, then let's go ahead and do the second break now, because it's already a little bit about time. We're kind of playing it by ear a little bit with the breaks. So let's go ahead and take a breather before we get into this last chapter for today. And especially since I just need more tea. So I will be right back, and then we'll do the last chapter for today. 1 minute, please. And we're back. Alrighty. Last chapter of the day. We are on page 283 for chapter 22. Go Cheng Chung clutched the little baton Zhao Yunlan had given him in a death grip. He was still reeling from the extreme terror of coming practically nose to nose with a Yochu that, just a second ago, he had electrocuted into a burnt pancake. Not only that, but the youth who'd just been talking and laughing with him also turned out to be a monster. His reflection in the glass showed a monster with a mouth that opened a full 180 degrees, as if its head had split in half to reveal a scarlet tongue and a fanged maw. Wandering through an empty resort to collect the souls of the recently deceased sounded like a horror film in its own right, but that was just setup. The main event was about to begin. Chu Shuja sidestepped the shower of electrical sparks, which didn't distinguish between friend and foe. He shoved his fanny pack into Go Cheng Chung's arms. We went through a lot of work collecting those, so hold on tight. Don't drop it. Go Cheng Chung's hands were shaking like he'd suddenly developed Parkinson's. All he could do was hug the bag tight to his chest. Are you afraid? Chu Shuja asked seriously. Ever honest? Go Cheng Chung nodded so vigorously that he looked like a chicken pecking at rice. Scared to death? Chu Shuja continued. Go Cheng Chung wiped his tears and kept on pecking. That's good. There was zero sympathy in Chu Shuja's voice. Keep it up. That left Go Cheng Chung speechless. Chu Shuja patted him firmly on the shoulder and adopted a creepy tone, pointing past him. Look, what's that? Go Cheng Chung looked where he was pointing and found himself staring straight into the eyes of a few Yochu. With his fear primed by Chu Shuja, a blood-curdling, inhuman scream exploded out of him. The little group was burnt to a crisp. Chu Shuja gave Go Cheng Chung a thumbs up. A moment later, moving with such speed he seemed to teleport, Chu Shuja vanished and reappeared on the roof of one of a row of small houses. He ripped his jacket open, exposing an arm that had turned a weird shade of blue. He wiggled his fingers, making his joints creak stiffly, then got out a piccolo carved from bone and began to play. A string of eerie notes sounded as his fingers danced. The calm earth underfoot started to ripple and buckle, and the dust that had coated the ground of the resort drifted up into the air. The dust motes were quickly drawn to each other, and one by one, intact human skeletons took shape. Several of the skeletons took up positions by Go Cheng Chung. The others threw themselves at the mysterious youth. The youth's eyes had become completely red. He turned his gaze on Chu Shuja. Corpse King. The notes Chu Shuja was playing became sharper. As though he had issued a command, his bone soldiers started to attack. One skeleton's sharp phalanges thrust toward the young youth's chest with lightning speed, only for him to vanish, ghost-like, on the spot. The skeleton's fingers punched 5 small holes into the ground. Flickering back into view off to one side, the youth struck at the skeleton soldier. The skeleton was unable to avoid the heavy blow, and its skull shattered, sending fragments flying in all directions. But at the renewed sound of the piccolo, the bone shards pieced themselves back together. The restored skeleton stretched out its neck, throwing itself at the youth again. Since the skeletons Chu Shuja had conjured were made of the ashes blanketing the resort, and he could just keep rebuilding them, even being pulverized only slowed them down. Although they weren't very powerful, their attacks served to tangle the youth up. The moment he made a mistake, the skeleton's narrow phalanges could stab in deep. The youth gave a cold laugh. This would be one thing coming from anyone else, but don't you think it's funny that you're part of the soul guarding order? You, a criminal corpse king, surrounded by the stench of death? Back when you slaughtered people without batting an eye, bled them dry, and feasted on their corpses, were you putting on this act of being a good person? I've already paid for my crimes, Chu Shuja said. He reflexively glanced at Go Cheng Chung and saw that he was too busy trying to deal with the endless swarm of Yochu to listen to the conversation. Inexplicably, Chu Shuja found himself sighing in relief. And what do you think you are? He countered. The youth's lips quirked up. He decapitated a skeleton and stuffed the whole skull into his mouth. As he chewed, he said, Me? We Gui are part of the natural order. Then, abruptly, he recited, Guard the souls of the living, bring peace to the hearts of the dead, atone for crimes done in life, and complete the unfinished cycle. Having rattled off the inscription on the back of the soul guarding order, he seized a skeleton and dismembered it, one limb at a time. Simply tightening his fist around the bones was enough to crush them. With another icy laugh, he said, "Whoever wrote that must have been a complete idiot." As a human, Go Cheng Chung's unique status among his colleagues meant that when he'd started at the SID, he'd only signed a labor contract. Since he wasn't bound by the order itself, he only vaguely knew about it and had never actually seen it. This was the first time he'd ever heard the entire soul guarding order, and it came from the mouth of this monster. But for some reason, the words suddenly flooded his mind, pushing everything else out. He just stood there, frozen, and the baton in his hand also calmed down. A Yochu hidden in a corner suddenly launched straight at him from its hiding spot. One of Chushuja's skeleton soldiers responded by doing something a human would do. It took a huge diagonal step and spread its arms wide, shielding Go Cheng Chung with what few bones it still had left. The Yochu smashed it to pieces, and Go Cheng Chung scuttled backward and fell on his ass. He yelped and closed his eyes, holding the baton above his head. It went off just as the Yochu's claws were about to brush against him. Medium well. Go Cheng Chung struggled to catch his breath while the shattered skeleton gradually rebuilt itself. Slowly it walked over to him. Despite knowing Chu Shuja had made the skeletons, Go Cheng Chung couldn't suppress a shudder of fear when it extended a creepy, white-boned hand toward him. But in the next second, the hand came to rest on his head, as though comforting him. It patted his hair gently. Skeletons just be out here throwing its body in front of Go Cheng Chung, patting Go Cheng Chung's head. What do they expect me to do with that exactly? If a forensic scientist or other expert had been there, they might have been able to tell Go Cheng Chung that this skeleton had belonged to a very young man, probably just over 20 years old. The soul of the living, the heart of the dead, perhaps every corpse on the verge of turning to dust, still held a fragment of a treasured memory. For reasons Go Cheng Chung didn't understand, the rims of his eyes suddenly stung. The skeleton turned to face away from him, standing guard. A sound like a muffled clap of thunder rang out. Go Cheng Chung automatically glanced at the sky, only to see that it was empty of the moon and stars. The sound of thunder continued, but no lightning split the darkness overhead. Then he realized that the thunder was coming from underground. The skeleton soldiers all stopped in their tracks. Their teeth clacked in a strange harmony, as though they also knew how to fear and were shaking with it. I got there eventually. Even the Yochu on the ground were motionless. They lay down in different positions, ears pressed to the ground, listening to something. Chushuja's instinct screamed at him that something was terribly wrong. He was a decisive fighter, and equally decisive when he fled. Without wasting his breath on explanations, he came flying down from the wall and grabbed Go Cheng Chung by the collar. The wind crammed Go Cheng Chung's scream back down his throat. A second later, Chushuja soared right back up and landed on the roof. Go Cheng Chung couldn't help but look down, only to see that the ground seemed to have turned into a huge pool of marsh gas, so black that it was impossible to see the bottom. Thick smoke billowed within the cracks in the earth. The weird youth who'd been troubling them suddenly ripped off his human skin, revealing the huge monster underneath, a high-level Yochu. Following his lead, all the Yochu's voices rose in unison, letting out a long wail toward the sky. Without a single glance back or a pause for breath, Chu Shuja dragged Go Cheng Chung to the entrance of the resort. He found their car, yanked the door open, and threw Go Cheng Chung inside. Who doesn't appreciate manhandling? I'm just, even at moments where there's like a lot of other stuff going on, a nice little, right? Bueller? Like, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this. Someone's out there, right? They get it. They see the, okay. He slammed his foot on the gas, and they were off like a shot. Go Cheng-chung was still fighting to breathe properly. What was that? I don't know, said Chu Shu-ja solemnly. Still confused, Go Cheng-chung asked, Then why are we running? Chu Shu-ja drove as if the car were an airplane, rocketing along so fast that the entire frame shook. It seemed almost as though its wheels were no longer on the ground. In an eerie tone, he said, If we don't run, you won't see tomorrow's sun, dumbass. It says you, not we. I don't think he's less worried about himself at this moment in time than he is about other people. Then what about Director Zhao and the others? Go Cheng-chung craned his neck, looking behind him. Will they come back? I need to call them. But as everyone knew, there was rarely cell signal during a disaster. Go Cheng-chung couldn't even dial 110. Chu Shu-ja spun the steering wheel, sending them into a giant turn. The tires gave an ear-splitting screech. The resort's location had been chosen for its scenic mountain background and the hot springs. This particular mountain rose about 1,000 meters above sea level. For safety reasons, the road winding up it was closed at night. Chu Shu-ja rammed the car right through the barricade, driving desperately for the peak. Escaping somewhere higher up seemed to be instinctual. After managing to calm down slightly, he recalled that, back when Buzhou Mountain had fallen, all the races were said to have climbed a certain primordial mountain in search of protection. The fragments of legend lodged in his memory seemed to be guiding him. Go Cheng-chung peered out through the window. At the foot of the mountain, not a single light was on in the resort. It seemed like a yawning mouth waiting to swallow everything up. Suddenly, everything went blurry as sheets of rain cascaded down the glass. The pounding of the rain blended with some kind of furious roaring, thick with evil. Go Cheng-chung shivered violently. Fast as a tornado, Chu Shu-ja drove to the top of the mountain. The very peak was inaccessible by car. It was reachable only via a thin man-made stone path that led to an unsafe-looking little suspension bridge. It had railings, but it was slippery from the rain. It looked horribly treacherous. And there, at the very top, was a cave full of stalactites. During the day, you had to buy a ticket to enter, but now, in the dead of night, it was unattended. Bring your baton, Chu Shu-ja told Go Cheng-chung. There's food and water in the trunk. Take as much as you can. Director Zhao should have left a backup lighter there, too. Let's go. They gathered everything together as quickly as possible. Go Cheng-chung kept his head down and ran after Chu Shu-ja, so it wasn't until they were already inside the cave that he looked back and realized there was a cliff with a 1,000-meter drop below the bridge's crude railings. His legs nearly turned to jelly. He couldn't even imagine how he'd managed to run across. Girl, same. Me and heights, not great. Chu Shu-ja found that he too had no signal. It was just the two of them, cut off from the world, accompanied only by the steady pitter-patter of the rain as they hid within the cave. I've read enough fan fiction to know where this is going. He peeled off his drenched shirt. I'm sorry. Oh. Okay. I now I don't know what to do with myself. So hang on. What did that sentence start? Okay. He peeled off. All right. His drenched shirt. Sure. And took a seat. Yeah. Half naked. Yeah. Of course. All right. He waved away the food and water Go Cheng-chung tried to push toward him and took a glance outside. I'd say something major has happened, he muttered. I'd say so, too. Throughout the night, the two of them took turns standing guard. Go Cheng-chung got up in the second half of the night and insisted on taking his turn. It seemed unnecessary to Chu Shu-ja, but he looked at the little baton that never left Go Cheng-chung's hand, and then he leaned against the frigid wall of the cave and closed his eyes. Go Cheng-chung forced himself to stay awake, keeping watch over the mouth of the cave. He sat upright, never loosening his grip on his baton. Eventually, he felt that daybreak had to be approaching, but the sky to the east stayed stubbornly dark. The whistle around Chu Shu-ja's neck suddenly blew a few times, and Go Cheng-chung rubbed his eyes firmly, switched the flashlight on, and dropped a few more cow's tears into his eyes. He peered outside and saw a silhouette floating in all the wind and rain. It seemed to be a young woman, clinging to the railings of the precarious little suspension bridge. Chu Shu-ja had woken up at the first sound of the whistle. He looked outside. A young female ghost. Go Cheng Chung sat up straight, flipping his notebook open. I recognize her. I saw her ID in the photo her family brought. Give me a bottle, said Chu Shujia. Soul bottle in hand, the Corpse King walked out of the cave. But perhaps he had an air of ruthlessness about him and a somewhat cruel appearance. Before he could get near her, the girl began screaming as though she'd suffered some terrible shock. Stay back! Don't come near me! Buffeted by the wind and rain, the railing creaked from her swinging. She looked dangerously close to falling off. Chu Shujia had no choice but to stop in his tracks. He didn't know what the girl had seen before she died, but it seemed like it wasn't a pretty memory. Even as a ghost, she was frightened and skittish, like a bird startled by an arrow. Chu Shujia shot a look back at Go Cheng Chung, who approached and carefully stepped onto the bridge. The bridge was only meant to hold one person at a time, and was deathly slippery underfoot from the rain. Neither of them was particularly heavy, but Chu Shujia still felt like it was trembling and swaying under Go Cheng Chung's footsteps. We're going to repeat that. Neither of them was particularly heavy, but Chu Shujia still felt like it was trembling and swaying under Go Cheng Chung's footsteps. They both stood sideways so Go Cheng Chung could squeeze past, albeit with great difficulty. I'm sorry, excuse me. Is that the mental image that I think it is? They both, as in... Yeah! Pardon me. Proximity is, a good friend of mine. They both stood sideways so Go Cheng Chung could squeeze past, albeit with great difficulty. She knows what she's doing. Then he took the bottle from Chu Shujia and tried to approach the floating girl. Miss, please don't be scared. We're the police. Come down here to where I am. Let me take you back, all right? For a long time, Go Cheng Chung stood in the wind and rain, getting drenched to the bone as he negotiated softly with the terrified girl. Finally, she let her guard down a little, accepting the reality of her death. Eyes on the bottle in Go Cheng Chung's hand, she carefully began to climb down. Go Cheng Chung breathed out a sigh of relief, just as a roar came from the other side of the bridge. Freshly frightened, the girl clung to the cold metal railing. Every last hair on Go Cheng Chung's body stood on end. Chu Shujia curled his fingers as though drawing a bowstring back. A small bow made of rainwater materialized in front of him, and he slowly pulled out a yellow talisman for summoning thunder and chasing away evil. Rolling it into the shape of an arrow, he knocked it on the water bow. Just as he was about to shoot, the surface of the bridge suddenly shook unnaturally. Chu Shujia paused, then saw Go Cheng Chung stare past him, panic-stricken. An unspeakable smell of rot, found only at the bottom of the Huang Quan, drifted by on the wind. At last, the Corpse King broke out in a cold sweat. That's a scene break. I love this phrase. Meanwhile, in the netherworld, no one had been prepared for Ghostface to blow himself up. Shen Wei swept Zhao Yunlan into his arms. Get down. There was a tremendous noise as the waters of the Wangchuan River erupted, forming a towering wall hundreds of meters high. It crashed back down like a tsunami, creating a huge vortex. Everyone with fast enough reflexes flew up to the top of the towering Yanluo courts. Everyone else was sucked into the ink-black Wangchuan. Shortly thereafter, the entire Huangquan Road, the Naihe Bridge, and the Yanluo courts themselves all shattered at once. The three men beat a hasty retreat, but Zhao Yunlan hesitated. Zhuheng's still there. Shen Wei grabbed him and pushed him along. Don't worry, she'll make it. I gave her a branch from the great divine tree. They retreated out of Ghost City and had just reached the pagoda tree that stretched up to Antique Street in Dragon City, connecting the yin and yang worlds, when they heard a loud meow. A black shadow flung itself into Zhao Yunlan's arms. Damn, fatty, why are you still here? Demanded Zhao Yunlan. Da Qing screamed into his ear. I've been looking for you all over the world, you heartless dick. I almost turned the entire netherworld upside down trying to find you. What just happened? Was there a gas explosion at the Yanluo courts? Me fucking ow, I was scared to death. Me fucking ow. That's got to be, that has to be the favorite Dacheng moment so far. Before Zhao Yunlan could respond, Shen Wei seized both human and cat and threw them up the tree. Catch up later. Hurry and get up there. This last order was roared at Lin Jing, who immediately obeyed and scrambled after them. Shen Wei brought up the rear, shaping 3 consecutive seals with his hands. The shadow pursuing them stopped in its tracks, as if it had hit an invisible wall. Shen Wei stumbled back a few steps, exhausted. He slumped heavily against the pagoda tree, fighting for breath. Icy sweat dampened his temples. The black shadow was now held back underground, but it was like a rapid river restrained by mud and sand. It smashed relentlessly against the invisible seal, and with every blow, the sound that rang out was enough to make the earth tremble. Zhao Yunlan grabbed Shen Wei's hand, all but dragging him up the tree. Shen Wei leaned against him, utterly drained. Once he finally caught his breath, the little group traversed the pagoda tree back to the mortal realm, where they found quite a welcoming committee. Wang Zheng, Sung Zan, and many of the SID's night shift were all there, with both Lao Wu and Lao Le, the nighttime and daytime guards. Lao Le had a huge bone in his hand, probably thinking of using it as a weapon. Even the old man guarding the pagoda tree had left his little shop, observing them from the door. There was a sudden squeal of a car's brakes as Zhao Yunlan's father drove onto the pedestrian street at great speed, but no, it wasn't his mortal dad. It was unmistakably Shenong's mortar. The mortar had made a beeline for Shen Wei. The first words out of his mouth sent everyone into an uproar. Has the seal broken completely? Zhao Yunlan's supportive grip on Shen Wei tightened. Under the weight of all the confused, nervous, or undecipherable gazes, Shen Wei nodded. The king of the Gui used himself to blow a hole in the great seal, but just now I resealed the old Hotu seal thrice on top of the fissure to keep it below ground. Besides that, the soul-executing blade opened a substantial crevice at the resort. A little chaos might leak through there, but it shouldn't be too serious. Nua disappeared thousands of years ago, Shenong's mortar said. The old Hotu seal has limited power. How long can you hold it? No more than half a day, Shen Wei replied. His voice was very low. At that point, Wang Zheng quietly spoke up. What is the Great Seal? Gently tugging her arm, Sung Zan raised a finger to his lips to tell her to stop talking. Sung Zan might have only understood 70 or 80% of what was being said, but he had helped Zhao Yunlan research ancient secrets and heard bits and pieces about the topic at hand. By this point, he had pieced together about half of what was going on. Shenong's mortar stared intently at Shen Wei. What do you intend to do, great immortal? Unperturbed, Shen Wei met his gaze. Holding Zhao Yunlan's hand, he said, I intend to keep the vow I made all those years ago. After a moment of shock at his apparent serenity, the mortar looked down at Shen Wei and Zhao Yunlan's joined hands. A kaleidoscope of expressions crossed the mortar's face before he stiffly averted his eyes. He gave a dry cough and then asked, How can I assist you? Shen Wei's gaze swept over everyone present, living and dead alike. Long ago, Kunlun sealed the 4 pillars with the 4 hallowed artifacts. Since then, it has been known that on the day the seal weakened, the artifacts would manifest in the world in response to the calamity. All 4 are now in my hands, and I must once again seal the 4 pillars that hold the earth and sky in place. I hope everyone here can help me stabilize the foundation of the sealing ritual. When he finished speaking, a vast bagua appeared above Antique Street. On it were the 4 symbols, Xiaoyin, Taiyang, Xiaoyang, and Taiyin. That comes with a footnote. The 4 symbols represent the guardians of the 4 cardinal directions, and they are each associated with a series of things like colors or seasons. The 4 creatures are the white tiger of the west, Xiaoyin, the vermilion bird of the south, Taiyang, the azure dragon of the east, Xiaoyang, and the black tortoise of the north, Taiyin. I feel like we've gotten this footnote before, but it is incredibly helpful to get it again, I must say. On it were the 4 symbols, Xiaoyin, Taiyang, Xiaoyang, and Taiyin, pointing in their corresponding 4 directions, west, south, east, and north. The long, slender mountain river all sprang from Shen Wei's palm first, growing until it once again looked as it had atop the great snowy mountain, jutting up like a great precipice. Upon reaching its full size, it took its position in the black tortoise position. That's the second time that they've repeated 2 words in the same sentence. Sorry, editing brain. It made a tremendous noise as it settled, and in response, an equally large sundial appeared, rotated, and then landed in the white tiger position. The merit brush, carved from the great divine tree, shot up into the sky and came to rest in the position of the azure dragon. Last to appear was the soul-guarding lamp, lacking its wick and giving no light. Shen Wei pointed, and it landed in the position of the vermilion bird. "Wait," Zhao Yanluo said. "Isn't the soul-guarding lamp in the Yanluo courts?" Earlier, I stayed behind and took it with me," replied Shen Wei. "The one in the Yanluo courts is an illusion." He ducked his head slightly, as if feeling a trace of shame for his sneakiness. Extreme times call for extreme measures. My apologies. Zhao Yunlan eyed him without a word. Shen Wei drew one of Zhao Yunlan's hands close. "This will hurt a bit," he murmured. "Please bear with it." Something pricked Zhao Yunlan's fingertip. A bead of blood formed, then flew straight into the soul-guarding lamp, where it became a slender thread. And then Shen Wei took off the pendant he'd worn around his neck for so long, the one that he never removed for any reason. He opened it and carefully poured some of its precious contents out. A minuscule flame flew from his fingertip, landing precisely on the tip of the delicate wick formed of blood. A firefly faint glow began to shine within the lamp. Shen Wei leaned down and sucked Zhao Yunlan's bleeding finger into his mouth. Did we really? She'll be going along. A perfectly compelling, important, vital scene of compelling, important, and vital things happening. And then she just pulls this shit and just clocks you out of nowhere. Wait, that's it? Zhao Yunlan asked, dumbfounded. Didn't that Yanluo king say he needed a whole vial of blood for my heart? The 10 fingers are linked to the heart, said Shen Wei. The soul-guarding lamp has lacked its wick for millennia. The netherworld wanted something that would guarantee peace, something to keep the lamp burning for thousands of generations. I, however, have only half a day to reseal the 4 pillars. A single drop from the tip of your finger is replacement enough. Then Shen Wei addressed the crowd. All those years ago, Kunlun Jun, the mountain god of the great wild, sealed the 4 pillars. I was heir to the 36 mountains and rivers, but I was born in filth. I am unable to establish any connection with the 4 hallowed artifacts, so I hope you will all lend me a hand. You'll have my deepest gratitude. Having said that, he resumed his true appearance. He stood before them clad in the soul-executing emissary's midnight robes, the full length of his hair spilling down around him. His innate demonic aura was unmistakable, as was his air of gentlemanly righteousness, a man at war with himself, yet possessed of an elegance beyond compare. No one could reject him. No. I agreed. Like, no, nobody could. How could you? This bitch certainly couldn't. Wang Zheng and Sung Zan exchanged a glance, and together they walked beneath the mountain river all. Da Qing, holding his golden bell in his mouth, turned and prowled to the ancient merit brush. La, who had tied a string of tiny golden fried fish to the huge bone he carried, followed Da Qing. Lin Jing got out a string of 108 Buddhist beads and stood beneath the reincarnation dial. Shen Nong's mortar was about to take a step when Zhao Yunlan called out and stopped him. Hey, you. The mortar, wearing Zhao Yunlan's father's body, turned back. Who? After a beat of silence, Zhao Yunlan said, You've taken enough advantage of me. Do you think you're actually my father? Just come here for a sec so I can talk to you. The mortar followed as Zhao Yunlan moved off to one side. Please go ahead, Kunlun Jun. With his back to the pagoda tree, Zhao Yunlan glanced at the ground. All seemed completely peaceful beneath the tree, not at all as though something impossibly vast was being held down. He was out of cigarettes, so he reached into his dad's pocket and claimed the packet he found there. He lit up, then briefly stood in silence, wreathed in smoke. After a moment, he said, "Actually, I have a favor to ask of you." "I am at Kunlun Jun's disposal," Shenong's mortar said quietly. "No, I mean it," said Zhao Yunlan. "I'm my parents' only son. By all rights, I should take care of them in their old age and see them off. I never imagined I'd run out of time, but here we are. White-haired elders shouldn't have to see their black-haired children off. Think of a solution for me." More moments passed before the mortar said, I confess I don't understand what Kunlun Jun means to say." Zhao Yunlan snorted. "Don't play dumb. I think you know exactly what I'm getting at." Shenong's mortar took a long look at him. "So in the end, is the soul executing emissary only able to uphold his vow because you've agreed to accompany him into death?" Casually blowing a smoke ring, Zhao Yunlan asked, "Do you think I'm selling my body?" "My apologies. I misspoke." The mortar lowered his head. Finally, almost in a sigh, he said, "I understand." Zhao Yunlan's eyes bored into his until the mortar continued. "Should Kunlun Jun no longer be in this world, I will leave your father's body and live on as Zhao Yunlan for you. Please be at ease, mountain god. Live well. Live like Zhao Yunlan." Zhao Yunlan gave his father's shoulder a disrespectful pat. "Enjoy the things you should enjoy, and whatever you need to do, do it well." "Thank you." He stubbed out his half-finished cigarette and brushed past. The mortar walked toward Lin Jing and the reincarnation dial, while Zhao Yunlan went to stand alone below the soul-guarding lamp. Zhao Yunlan laid a gentle hand on the soul-guarding lamp. Uneven inscriptions were etched onto its surface, identical to those on the back of the soul-guarding order. A strange feeling stirred within him, like the lamp really was connected to his flesh and blood. The flame seemed to miraculously flicker in time with his heart, as though two people were standing there, the person he'd been thousands of years ago, and the person he was now, thousands of years later. The passage of time had transformed everything. Turning, Shen Wei looked at the old man from the general store who had stood guard over the divide between yin and yang. The wrinkled old man led the whole crowd of night shift ghosts from Bright Avenue, forming a circle around the ritual. Then he raised his head and bowed to Shen Wei, just as people had in the ancient past. "I am old and have no further use," he said. "I will help guard you, great immortal." Shen Wei nodded. Raising a finger, he wrote in the air, stroke by stroke, an ancient text from the time of gods and demons. The text itself seemed to hold power, flowing in the air like rippling water. Then Shen Wei brought his fingers together and struck the words forcefully with his palm. The strokes all dissipated at once, flying toward the four positions, where they landed on each person's brow. At once everyone could hear the spell, which had been passed down from the beginnings of the Great Wild. The weight of it was incomparable. The urge to bow down and worship spontaneously ignited in each and every heart. Finally, Shen Wei glanced to the south and met Zhao Yunlan's gaze. A faint smile suddenly graced his lips, like a springtime flower bursting into bloom. That's the end of the chapter. And the end of the stream for today. Right on time, as it would seem. We're on page 301 for chapter 23. Yep. We have, what is there? A little over, there's like 400. Yeah, this is 420 pages long. So we're right on time. We have 120 pages left and 2 more streams. Yeah. This is about where I remember in the show. This is about where things get very real. And I'm deeply excited, terrified, sad, grieving to see how they do it. So far from what I remember, it's going along ultimately fairly accurately, if I remember correctly, which doesn't make it any less painful. I won't talk about my response and reaction to the very end until we get to the very end, just so I can like see, and also spoilers. But yeah, this is this is where we're really sliding into home base. So, I will be back tomorrow, which is Thursday. Days of the week are impossible for me this week because I usually just do streams Tuesday and Thursday, and this week it's been every day. So what day is it? Yes, that's what my brain is doing. Tomorrow is Thursday. I will be back here at 3 p.m. to read another 60 pages of the end of this series. I hope you had a good time. I had a great time. And then there at the very end, there a time. And I hope the day is treating you well. I will see you guys tomorrow. Please take care of yourselves until then. All right? I'm serious about that. And I will see you at 3 p.m. tomorrow.